Hey, welcome to the screencast for Supply and Demand and Corona Oh My. Thank you for joining us. Bear with me if you will, please. This is a live version. If there's one thing I know about screencasts, is that you cannot pause, stop, edit, change, or do over anything. So it's going out live the way we all intended it to be, full of mistakes and full of errors. Hopefully not too many. If you're looking at the screen, you can see the first slide is supply and demand and Corona oh my. And many people have been talking this last week that one of the reasons we're all staying home is to try and flatten the curve. You can see the curve doing that right there. Flattening the curve refers to the issue of placing demand for healthcare workers. The idea is that if everyone gets sick all at once, there'll be too much demand on healthcare workers, and as you know, there is a limited supply of healthcare workers, which leads us to the economic concept we discussed earlier of shortage. The reason they call it a bell curve is because it kind of looks like a bell curve. Now, if we're going on to the next slide, remember we talked about the concept of too much stuff being, remember my words here, folks, too much stuff being a surplus. Wrote that. And too little, what is it? What is it? Yeah, you're right. Shortage. That's exactly what it is. And you know what we're talking about in terms of too little and too much? We have this very graph. You remember that graph? It's super fun. If you want to see my version looks like that. See? Look at that. Isn't that cool? Kind of looks like the other one, but just like with less color and can't read it as well. So remember the idea was that when the equilibrium is out of whack, we have surplus, catching it in the graph at the top, or we have shortage, which is the bottom part. It's all falling out, like we talked about with toilet paper and red rice, quinoa, amaranth, barley. Barley is the best part. So that's again the concept of economic supply and demand in terms of surplus and shortage. Now, this also leads to what you've noticed this week in terms of buying more if you have more money. If you buy more when you have more money, you see the concept there is called a normal good. A lot of things are normal goods. In this case, in particular, not only is a normal good toilet paper, but it's things like ground beef, flour, canned goods, snacks, other kinds of things like that. On the other hand, things that you would buy less if you have more money are called inferior goods. And we talked about inferior goods before, but clearly in the grocery stores, we can see that there are some inferior goods, like my barley, quinoa, and red rice amaranth mixture. There was a number of other things that were inferior goods as far as people could tell, things people didn't know how to cook, like corned beef, things people didn't know what to do with, like various spices and condiments, or didn't think they would have much use for. So those are good examples of this last week of both normal goods and inferior goods. Now, one thing we also saw this week was the idea of elasticity. Now, elasticity refers to how much our willingness to buy or how much the willingness of the producers to make changes based on changes not only in price, but also other factors. We might remember in supply and demand, there are a variety of factors for how and why elasticity and those lines shift. We'll go over those in just a second. So, how elastic are things? For supply, factors that shift supply, we'll talk about elasticity in a second, are things like, remember the cost of inputs? How much is it going to cost people to make? If it costs them less to make, then they'll want to produce more. If it costs them more to make, they'll want to produce less. We also remember technology. As technology increases, the willingness of suppliers to make stuff and the ability of suppliers to make stuff increases. So they'll be making more than they did before. And of course, business taxes. If the government decides we will put a delay on taxes for 90 days or 60 days, as they have done, or if they said they will give businesses support, then businesses may be more likely to pay their employees or to invest in their businesses. And remember, when we talk about elasticity of supply, elasticity of supply deals with how quickly can suppliers make more of something based on a change of demand. For example, orange trees and oranges are inelastic because you have to plant trees and wait and let them grow. Services tend to be more elastic because you can just keep making haircuts. We can see the same concept today in a variety of things like testing kits and healthcare workers and vaccines. Those all things are relatively inelastic right now because it's going to take a while for them to develop more of those things. And when it comes to demand, remember, one of the big issues we've been dealing with this week is the concept of consumer expectations. What do you think is going to happen in the future? And as you know, if you think a bike's price is going to increase, you're going to go rush out and buy it. If you think it's going to decrease, you're going to wait. Right now, everyone says shelter in place. We all knew the next thing was going to happen. We were going to run out of toilet paper and hand sanitizer. Everyone rushed out and bought toilet paper and hand sanitizer, even though the grocery stores are open and they will continue to be open throughout this entire process. And there's no real need for anyone to have rushed out and gotten toilet paper unless they believed that everyone else was going to do so also. This is a concept called panic buying, which you referenced and discussed in an earlier assignment. Now, remember the characteristics of elasticity for demand are there possible substitutes. It's not very important compared to other items in your budget. They are considered a luxury. We have our good example of quinoa. It's a luxury. Most of the time, I'm going to use pasta. It's not very important. In this case, we generally don't think of spending too much of our budget on pasta, but now we have. And there are possible substitutes. Did I mention pasta? We could eat pasta, or rice, or potatoes. Now, when it comes to inelastic demand, there are no substitutes. We'll see what kind of substitutes people may end up having to come up with for toilet paper. It is important for survival. In this concept, it's not important for people's literal survival, but it's important for what their concept of civilization and new normal lives is. And it's very possible that if there is such a thing called price gouging, people would have to figure out some other way to make toilet paper. Now, price gouging is another economic concept which we'll discuss at a later point. Not today. You know what? That was basically our slideshow. But I'm going to talk for just one moment about how we might remember how to shift our graphs. So I'm going to go back, to our graphs. Remember our supply graphs? Perfect. So remember, this right here illustrates a perfect concept of what our supply curve looks like. And if we remember, if all of a sudden it becomes possible to make more of something, then suppliers are more likely to make more. And if suppliers are more likely to make more, the curve is going to shift which way, left or right? You guessed it, to the right. Can't see that at all, can you? No, you can't. And of course, if it becomes harder to make something, or it costs them more to make something, or the government's raising taxes to make something, then it's going to shift to the left. That's right. It's going to shift to the left. Look at that. It's on the left over there. You can read that, can't you? Now, the same thing is true for demand, right? As we know, as the demand goes up for toilet paper and canned goods and ground beef, that's going to shift to the right. If we are all of a sudden not wanting gluten-free pasta, then the demand is going to shift to the left. And that's what we remember our relationship to price and quantity. Remember what kind of relationship they were? Let me go back to your graph for just a second. Remember our graph? Oh yeah, there's our graph. So remember the idea of price and quantity equilibrium. Remember that demand and supply have different relationships. For supply, if the amount of something goes up, what happens to the price? That's right, it goes down. And of course, that makes it a inverse relationship because the more you have of something, the less the price is. For a demand, however, remember, it's a direct relationship. In other words, the more you want of something, the more you're willing to pay for it. So as the quantity moves, the price will move up also. Same thing, it'll go down if demand goes down. Price and quantity will also. And those are the key concepts that we wanted to remember when remembering price and quantity equilibrium and our demand shifts, not to mention also our elasticity of goods and the concept of normal and inferior goods. So once you've got this, these concepts totally sort of pa'a, remember pa'a, the Hawaiian term for rock hard, steady, firm, knowing it in your muscles, then you can go ahead and try the practice quiz. That's linked. I've never done a practice quiz before, but I should be linked or assigned to you after this. It is a practice quiz. That means all you have to do is try it. I have no idea whether it will give you a right answer or not. Sometimes it will. They're multiple choice. Sometimes it's text answer. You never know. You will be able to see the right answers if I've set it up correctly, and you will be able to review the concepts we have learned before. Hope that helps. And thank you for staying tuned. This was pretty good live screencast, if you think. I think this is, first version, run through, no practice, no rehearsal, and it all came out pretty well. Send me your messages and thoughts about how awesome it was. And we are going to then figure out a way to stop recording. Ah, there we go.